Lord of all hopefulness, Lord of all joy, whose trust, ever childlike, no cares could destroy, be there at our waking, and give us, we pray, your bliss in our hearts, Lord, at the break of the day. There are but a few opening lines of a hymn I love better than these, especially at the beginning of a service of Sunday worship. In fact, our hymn this week is also popular as an opening hymn at weddings, because it calls upon the presence of God for the different times and seasons in our lives, a fitting foundation for any couple beginning their life journey together. It was written by Jan Struthers, at least that was her pen name. Her real name was Joyce Plazik, and she wrote many poems and hymns under the pseudonym derived from her mother's maiden name, Jan Struthers. Jan Struthers was a native of London, but died in New York City. Jan Struthers is best remembered for her World War II novel, Mrs. Miniver, and the film based on the novel. Mrs. Miniver was a character created in 1937 by Struthers for her newspaper columns in the London Times. The Minivers depicted light-hearted scenes of British life before World War II. Publishing her first work when she was 16, Struthers' career included many published articles, short stories and poems in English periodicals. In addition to writing 5 volumes of poetry, she served on the editorial board of the Times. She lived with her children in New York during the war and became quite popular there in the city as a lecturer. Lord of All Hopefulness was a hymn prepared at the request of her friend Percy Dearmer, with whom she worked on the publication in 1931, Songs of Praise. Our hymn today is one of the best examples of an all-day hymn, a hymn which petitions God's abiding presence throughout each moment of the day. Each of the 4 verses in turn requests God's care at the break of the day, noon of the day, eve of the day, and the end of the day. The days, of course, are not merely times of the day, but can also be interpreted as seasons in our lifetimes. The text uses the classic form of a collect, a prayer that includes an address describing an attribute of God, followed by a petition relating it, in this case, to some part of our day or our lives. The first line of each verse begins by addressing God and naming one of God's attributes: Lord of all hopefulness, eagerness, kindliness, gentleness. The second line expands on that attribute, and then in the middle of the hymn and verse, the posture changes to a petition: be there at our waking, labours, homing, sleeping. The requests are simple, in each in succession: bliss, strength, love, peace. I've been trying to think what it is about this hymn that I love so much. And to be honest, I find the answer quite difficult to pin down. But the question takes me to my favourite lines, which are in the second verse. Lord of all eagerness, Lord of all faith, whose strong hands were skilled at the plane and the lathe. For me, these lines speak to us of the humanity of Jesus. That is to say, often when we imagine him in our minds or describe him in word and song, we speak of him as if he had been different to us, other than human, special, different in nature to us, almost removed from the regular daily life concerns and mundane things that bother us. These lines remind us that Jesus was a real person, a carpenter's son, maybe originally a carpenter and a tradesman himself before his baptism and his ministry. A man who got sticks in his fingers, whose hands were rough through working wood. Not a person with a protective bubble of God around him, but a normal person whose life's concerns and anxieties would very much have corresponded with our human concerns. And someone who nonetheless was soaked in the presence and the love of God. God incarnate. I've always taken encouragement from the thought in that hymn itself that Christ really knew what it was to be human, and particularly in terms of work. Perhaps it's what Max Weber would have termed my Protestant work ethic. But I take great encouragement in the thought that God honours and is present in our working lives. Work is a huge part of our lives, a testing part of life at times, and yet also a sphere of life where we can be productive, not only for ourselves, but more importantly, for the sake of others, whatever it is in life that we do. In the next verse, those same hands of work and labour are kindly, as we bring to mind the radical welcome and hospitality of Christ, a welcome which beckons us come to him, and which, when we emulate it, makes a place called home for all of God's diverse and beautiful people. Lord of all gentleness, Lord of all calm, whose voice is contentment, whose presence is balm, be there at our sleeping, and give us, we pray, your peace in our hearts, Lord, at the end of the day. How often do we approach night time, our minds full of the excitement or the travails of the day? And what we need more than anything else is to be able to leave all of that aside and rest, to hand it over to Jesus Christ and find a sense of calm so we can sleep. The hymn closes with the sentiment that just as our day started in the providential care of God, whatever has occurred in between, so we end the day in the same love and care of God. And it's true of life too. When our work is done, our labour is over, when we've reached the end of our days, Christ comes, his hands swift to welcome, his arms to embrace, that we might find our rest and our peace in him. From the beginning of the day to its end, from the start of our lives to their finish, we're not alone. God is with us. Lord of all hopefulness, Lord of all joy.